And here we have another episode of All Things Conflict with me, your host, Maria Arpa. I've got today the most wonderful Penny Parker. Now, Penny was a corporate lawyer who became involved as a volunteer in a prison project. She led a project called Sycamore Tree, which is all about restorative justice. And then she eventually founded an organisation called Standout, which supports prisoners in prison and as they come out of prison with practical help, emotional support, and the kinds of care and support needed to help people reintegrate back into society. I'm really excited about this conversation. Penny has many, many years working in prisons on the ground. And as you know, this series, Justice Redesigned, is all about talking to people who are doing the work. So let's dive in. Penny, welcome. Thank you for coming all the way up to Peterborough where we record the podcast. And we've known each other for a long time. I don't think we've met so often, but we've certainly been sort of playing in the same sandpit, haven't we? Watching each other at a distance. And so it's really wonderful to get into the studio and to really talk to you about what you've done. I have great admiration for your work. But I only just realised we've got a kind of link to how we ended up here, because I think you were a corporate lawyer and then you got sort of dragged into, I mean, that's probably the wrong word, but you ended up volunteering. You probably did that all with enthusiasm. And I was, in marketing, and then I started volunteering. And then we got completely sucked into this, what's called the third sector. And I mean, we can certainly take that apart in a bit. But please, introduce yourself and your work, because it is wonderful.
Oh, well, thank you. And it's, it's great to chat. And when we met last time, we chatted, didn't we, for hours and hours. And I was going to say, I think I definitely wasn't dragged in. I was, I would say, drawn in. And I was drawn in by conversations and the experience of people that I knew through church who were volunteering in prison. And I happened to have, a BCAT local, HMP Wandsworth, around the corner. It was on my daily walk to school with my kids. So I kind of had a career break from the law, and but felt, that there was something I wanted to do. I wanted to find something that would, kind of fill my daytime times. And that was interesting. And I just found the conversations, their reflections after they'd gone in, fascinating. So ended up going in with a group from church initially, very quickly thinking, this is such an interesting environment. And I think the thing that really, really drew me in to begin with was that we would have conversations. I found that you would have conversations with men coming into groups or on the wing. I ended up being a volunteer with the chaplaincy team doing pastoral support during the day, so having keys and then just being a presence on the wing or making pastoral calls to people who'd asked for a visit from a chaplain. And you would incredibly quickly get to the heart of the matter with people in a way that doesn't happen in our normal lives. We can skirt around conversations with our family or with our friends, and we may well avoid ever getting to the real issues that we're tackling or facing in life. And in prison, I found that to be just not the case at all, that people would go straight into the thing that really worried them. And I guess that being part of a chaplaincy team as a volunteer, you're recognised as being a kind of safe person, that role, is set up to enable people to find support. And so that was sort of my introduction. We were working then under an absolutely wonderful chaplain who quite unusually had spent all of his career in the prison service. I think often people go to it slightly later. And he had set out as a young man to be a chaplain within the the prison system, and therefore had been to a number of prisons around the country. And Wandsworth was his final posting before retirement. And he had, I think originally at HMP Elmley, had been part of the team that introduced one of the really early Sycamore Tree restorative justice programs. And he approached me. I'd only been volunteering probably for about 6 months, and asked whether I would be interested in setting it up in Wandsworth. He kind of wanted it to be his legacy. And I think just his experience of seeing this deeply relational program working, he just knew that it was, I think for him, it felt like a gift he could leave behind. And I knew nothing about it. I knew nothing really about restorative justice. I'd been looking a little bit at things I could do. So I was looking at a move from corporate law into a kind of linked field. And I'd been having a conversation around community mediation, that kind of thing. So hearing about restorative justice was, for me, was kind of also a version of that. It was that relational kind of problem solving, kind of conversational approach. And so I kind of dug into it a little bit, was really, really fascinated by it. And kind of had a moment of thinking that it's a kind of no-brainer when you look at restorative justice and when you think about how the justice system works, and when you listen to victims of crime and think about the frustrations they have through the process of justice. And nothing, I think, there has really changed. I mean, I think that would be a reflection you would find today in just the same way. And so, I kind of felt like I wanted to do more, and I kind of read up about it. I then trained with Prison Fellowship to be a Sycamore Tree tutor, and gathered a team of volunteers to set the programme up in Wandsworth. So we ran the first programme in Wandsworth in May 2005. And initially we did 3 a year, and then we increased it to 4 a year. And I then really had the privilege of sort of having time to invest in it, because I wasn't working full time. It became the thing I kind of did. And I was then offered the opportunity to set up a team in Bronzefield working with women, which was just a really fascinating opportunity to work in a really different way and to experience the different ways in which men and women come at that experience and work with same material, but really explore it in very different ways. And over time, I ended up doing a master's degree in order to do a dissertation looking into it. And that gave me an opportunity to explore how the programme landed at a lifers unit. So over a period of about 12 years, I kind of had the opportunity to either run or observe or be part of running Sycamore Tree in a whole range of different settings. But running through that was this consistency of the project at Wandsworth over a period of 12 years or so. And kind of through that presence, I would be on the wings doing recruiting. I would obviously run the programme. We'd follow up with men who'd finished it. I kind of started to encounter and realised what an impact it had on people, that we created a space that was not like other spaces or courses that they were invited into. And it was a course, it had a structure, but I think there was a freedom to have conversations in the programme. And people really appreciated that. But what started to happen was that people would come up to me at the end and say, "What can I do now, miss?" And I naively kind of would say, "Well, talk to your CM on the wing, talk to your offender manager, find out from them what else is available." And of course, when I started to look at what else I might suggest, discovered really there wasn't anything. And I think the particular focus for me was the realization of how damaging time in prison is. People go to prison when things have gone very wrong in life, and usually that's a cumulative thing. Okay, there's an event that has become the event that took them there, but there's a whole complex web of stories and reasons why, and Sycamore Tree kind of unpacks that. And then what I became acutely aware of was the way in which prison layers further trauma onto those experiences, that it often cursorily only deals with the complexities, and then layers this additional challenge on people, and that the prospect of leaving prison made people really, really anxious. And that was something that really kind of whirred away in my brain, thinking there has to be a way. It has to be important that we help people to face that, to prepare for that well, kind of practically, emotionally, kind of mentally in terms of preparing. And that was what kind of set me off in thinking about what we could do differently in that space.
Amazing. So you've set off so many things in me, because, you've obviously been around prisons and prisoners and the system for many years. So you've seen a lot. So one part of me wants to say, well, tell us about some of your on the ground experiences, how, as someone who's not an employee of the prison service and who isn't a prisoner, how you see it and experience it. And another part of me wants to jump back to, should we just try and pick apart what restorative justice actually is and isn't? So and then go on to what what you've done with Standout. So what do you think? What's sort of alive in you?
Yeah. Well, those are both really interesting questions. Dealing with that kind of experience of being in that space, I think it's really interesting at the moment that there is quite rightly such an emphasis on the lived experience of being someone who has spent time, has served time in prison. But of course, actually, as anyone who has worked in that space in whatever capacity, you also have that lived experience of that. It's a different experience, but nonetheless, you are working within, a total institution. You're working within all of the rules and regulations that go with that, the responsibilities that go with it, the pressures of it. Actually, although you can go home at the end of the day, the isolation of it, especially these days when we're so used to not being isolated, or to be able to be in contact. And so I think that is a really important thing. I was talking to someone yesterday about whether there is a unique kind of capacity, ability within a volunteer-led project to make the greatest difference. And I think there is something about being distinct from the system. I think that there is something about the role of volunteers that when people in prison appreciate and realize that a team has come in and they've all given up their time, that has a really significant impact. I think that people employed by independent third sector organizations, so ones that are not effectively an arm of delivering the state's kind of responsibilities, I think that actually, while there is certainly an impact of volunteers, I think there is also an impact just through being an independent organization going in. And certainly one, if you're led by values that are really strong and really clear, that I think people very quickly learn whether it's tick box.
Absolutely.
Or whether you're there for them.
Absolutely.
And, if actually your pressure is that you've got to see 10 men in the next half an hour and write your notes up and you're form filling, it's when none of us, we know what that means.
Well, you're hitting some really strong notes for me, because as we go into prison and we work with a group of people. I mean, our project is very small scale, but it's small scale almost deliberately because we fund the work ourselves. And there's nothing like sitting in front of a group of men who are in that deliberation of whether to trust or not, and saying, we don't get any money from the system. And my husband and I have built 7 charity shops. So we've got managers working, but bringing in revenue, the profits of which come to the charity so we can fund this work. And there's nothing like being able to look someone in the eye and say, I actually have the ability to speak truth to power.
And that is so important, I think, and using our experiences. So I think one of the things on Standout that we are now doing more is reflecting on the fact that we've been operating for 8 years. that we have accumulated some, considerable experience in that time, and feel actually that one of the things we can do in the Speaking Truth to Power bit is actually to take the experiences of our participants and to ground the reflections that we make, not necessarily just in our observations, but in what we know that they've experienced, or indeed what they tell us they want to have.
Absolutely. So tell me a bit about Stand Out, because you've just mentioned it, but, for people listening, it would be really great to know the amazing work that's being done.
Stand Out was really my response to thinking that there was something that was missing in terms of the support for people leaving prison. And we are independently funded, so charitably funded. We started in Wandsworth, and we're now working across the 3 big BCAT local London prisons, so Wandsworth, Pentonville and Wormwood Scrubs. And our work starts in prison and finishes outside, so bridges the gate, as people, through the gate, as people say.
Gate,
for me, that was a sort of no-brainer, but you've been around in prisons long enough to know that it wasn't always that way. So it is good that these days you can work through the gate, because that is fundamental for success, in my view. And so we run a program in prison that is all about empowering people to make positive change. It's about supporting people so that they start to understand and realize that and can realize their own potential. And ultimately, we're looking to support people to rebuild lives after prison and to thrive. And that journey becomes very much a journey that's personal for them. So it's not a one size fits all. Our framework for our work, I sometimes describe it as the invitational question when we're recruiting on the wings is, so you're coming up for release sometime soon. What are your plans? Have you got work lined up? Have you got training? Have you got things that you need to sort out? And the program is an invitation to come and have a space and some time to think through those things. It absolutely has some practical things around employment, but the really big things that we think are important are the stuff around mindsets and life skills. So building confidence through that engagement in a group, building some self-esteem, taking people out of their comfort zone, reminding them how, a little bit, I think, modeling how life works on the outside. So creating a space that isn't prison. So having a bit of fun in the classroom as well. I think there's a huge amount to be gained from learning when you've got some humour and some enjoyment in it. And just making it very real for people. So talking about their own situations with space and time, mixing group work with individual one-to-one support. And our approach we describe as a coaching approach. So we're always kind of throwing the ball to the group with a question and seeing where that goes and pushing further into answers. And so we have a curriculum, but it's very much kind of working with the, how the group responds. And a bit like anything in life, I always say, back in the days when I was actually delivering it and recruiting, it is classically an example of something where the more you put in, the more you'll get out. So, we kind of want to hear from you. We want to hear your views. We want to hear your voice. And for people who complete the program in prison, the period then up to their release, we support them with one-to-one casework each week, usually with coaches being in and seeing them, additional workshops, some of which the participants might themselves talk about. They might say, I'd be really interested to do a session thinking about family and how I'm going to reconnect with family. So we've done things like that, or we've kind of taken a theme. And then once they get to the gate, we will offer, if they don't have anyone to meet them, to do a gate meet and to take them to probation and to sort accommodate, to kind of go through those processes on day one. Which are so critical because so often that's when things can go, for some people that can go really quickly awry.
Brought up a story, absolutely true, of a guy who came through our work, and I'm not going to say what prison or do anything that identifies the person, but he a lot of drug issues, came through our program. He was so enthusiastic. He loved this. He was going out in the world to do it differently. His mum showed up at the gate with drugs. And then within a couple of weeks, he was recalled.
Yeah. And, I've walked past or gone into Wandsworth and there's been a flash Range Rover sat outside with the invitation to get straight back into dealing.
And I spoke to one resettlement officer and he said that sometimes people are going out the gate and they say, "See you later this evening, Gov."
Yeah. So, meeting someone at the gate is just a way to support someone. I mean, obviously someone's got to want to have us there, but they're always really, kind of emotional days. But also they're days that often when the coaches come back at the end of them, they realise that they've had effectively a series of sliding door moments. Because they were there, they were able to kind of sometimes intervene into a conversation with probation to clarify things that maybe have not been clear and to smooth that relationship. And that's a piece of work that we do in the program now, which is really critical. It's helping people prepare for how they're going to work with probation. What does that period of working under, being under license mean, and how can you manage it well? How can a person on license manage it well and understand the implications of their conditions, what probation is really about. Surprise, surprise, actually helping people realize that probation don't necessarily want to just lock them up again. They want their success. And so actually, if you go in with a mindset that's what that's about, that can change the game and how those conversations goes. But sliding door moments at hostels where, no one's there to let them in at the appointed hour. And so you've got to kill the time, and knowing that you could just walk from that and then instantly be as you say, in breach by the end of the day.
And it's the first 48 hours are critical, aren't they, on release? I know that. And I know that there was someone once released on Christmas Eve from Dartmoor, which is in the middle of nowhere, and you can't get a train or a bus or, and what I think you leave with, is it £35?
Well, it has now, they did increase it a couple of years back. So it is now, and it's meant to be, pegged against with a cost of living rise. I think it's 70 something, maybe just turned 80. Yeah, so it had a big jump because it was so low. It hadn't increased for, I think, something like 19 years.
That's right. And and isn't there a couple of prisons? I'm not sure how widespread it is, but I've seen that there are these things called departure lounges now.
Yes,
that sounds really
and
amazing.
I think they're a really good move. Yeah. And again, they're addressing that that really critical need to check that someone is ready to go and has things in place, and often they'll have clothing supplies if people haven't got they've been in so long and they're coming out in the winter when they came in the summer. We'll do things like making sure people have got a travel card, that they've got food, that they maybe got a food bank voucher. We're going to we'll do a shop, but maybe make sure they're set up, clothes and toiletries, all of those kind of things. And then after that kind of release point support, we then just offer a totally open-ended program of support, and it's very much guided by what each individual wants. So there's no program for that bit. It's traveling with people as they journey through that time after prison. So it's looking at what they want to prioritize and want to work on, and all the while we'll be encouraging kind of that focus on kind of getting back into rebuilding things in life. So rebuilding relationships, potentially looking at mental health issues, potentially dealing with, if someone's got clean inside but has never done a residential rehab, encouraging them to consider actually doing that piece of work that can be critical to cement that experience of kind of perhaps not having taken or used drugs or alcohol while inside prison. And then also continuing the conversation with people around training, around employment or volunteering. So we invite people back together from time to time outside. We run something we call Career Hub, and Career Hub replicates a little bit an event, a couple of things during the program. So during the program in prison, people work with volunteers to put a CV together. A separate day, they do mock interviews using a real job that they've chosen, and we also host employers in the prison and say, come in and tell the group about your why you employ people with convictions who come out of prison, what working with you would look like, kind of invite us into understanding what it means to work for your company, and sometimes it's just sort of myth busting as well. So dealing with assumptions around disclosure or kind of DBS checks and the impact of those. So Career Hub is it does a little bit of that. So usually on a career hub, we'll invite a couple of employers in, and they'll do the same thing. And then maybe actually people in the room will say, actually, I'd really like to talk about whether there's a role. And so there might be an informal first interview, or filling an application form in with a view to picking things up on the outside, or revising a CV. And we do that actually in partnership with a consulting firm who generously host us, and then have volunteers who also come into this conversation. So again, that idea that you've got someone who's taken an interest, who's taken an afternoon out of their office life to come and spend time and to support
So for me, what I'm getting is, it's like the person's in the driving seat of their own life. You're not pushing them through any kind of conveyor belt where, you've got to do this and you've got to hit these milestones, otherwise we don't like you anymore, which so many programs, so many programs do that to people. So you're keeping people in the driving seat of their own life, and then providing, either the sort of support of connection, the support of care, the support of saying, you're not on your own, of helping people not fall into isolation. And then also doing things that are very practical and informative if needed.
Yes.
That's how I...
It really is. So you're absolutely right. There's no set structure.
Yeah.
What we have done recently has been quite interesting, and we've been thinking about, from a theory of change point of view, how we would describe the work. And I think that what we see is that there are common features to people's journeys. The time periods may vary from individual to individual depending on their circumstances, but that there is importantly a period of time to kind of transition out of prison and to kind of get your head back into life outside, dealing with all of those kind of immediate things that come up, ID, accommodation, bank accounts, kind of the immediate needs, but just facing sometimes, someone was describing the other day the sensory overload of coming out of prison.
Yes, absolutely.
And, that require time to work through that. So that's kind of the first phase. Then we see people moving into what we are calling a kind of building stability phase. So that's kind of, securing kind of accommodation that is going to be sustainable, kind of strengthening, rebuilding family ties, maybe engaging with mental health support or substance misuse support, and kind of reaching a more settled state. And then it's from that settled state that we think people then can be ready to think about employment. But we typically say to people, because there's a lot of stuff around, especially from in politics and from policy around employment for people leaving prison. And that is a fantastic driver to encourage employers who previously haven't engaged in that space to think about what their policy is and whether actually they could start to benefit from employing people who have convictions. However, flipping it around the other way and grounding it in the experience of someone who's leaving prison, everything that we've learnt suggests that someone leaving prison is not ready on the Monday after they leave prison to walk into a job. So, that transitioning and the stabilisation is the period of time that needs to elapse. And when we're on the programme, we'll typically say, our experience is that you'll need 2 to 3 months. And obviously some will be shorter and some will be longer.
And some will be longer because, you've had your identity stripped away. First of all, you're no longer, you're not the person that you are. You have to become someone else in prison. The system forces you into that, and you have to do that to protect yourself. I've seen that. So first of all, you've got to remember who you are. You've got to and you've got to remember who you are without the bits that got you into prison in the first place, right? And then you've only been shouted at or given instructions or told what to do. And, you've definitely been the lower status in the power dynamics of a prison. And that's going to have an effect on how you understand going into a workplace and having a boss telling you what to do. Because if your issues around authority kick in, you're not going to survive.
Yeah.
And so for me, there is this massive readjustment as you say, 2 to 3 months, I think, is optimistic. But obviously for some people, it's great. You know, some people can do that and can regulate themselves, but some people just can't. I was really fascinated by several things that you've brought up. And I think it wouldn't be fair of me to do this and just talk about the work you're doing without, I mean, it's an awkward question. It's not my question. It's what I imagine, people who are not involved in this world at all. Because to you and I, it's completely obvious. But there will be a question that goes, but hang on a minute, these people wronged people and they did, bad things. And why should we pour any resources into them whatsoever? And I think it's a valid question if you don't understand the landscape. So I think we should address that. Why would we bother putting resources into people when often there could be victims who didn't get such support?
I think I'd centre, I think I have two answers to that.
Yeah.
One is centred in the people that we're talking about that you might argue don't deserve anything. I'll have to try and remember what my second answer is.
Yeah. I do that all the time.
And that I think is that absolutely people have committed acts that have caused enormous trauma and harm. And this is not about denying the impact of that on victims, on communities, on society, the cost to society of that whole process. But I think that in many cases, there is usually a story there where there is already trauma and damage, whether it's from childhood, whether it's from broken families, whether it's from dropping out of education, whether it's from neurodiverse needs that have never been met, whether it's from mental health issues. The reality is we lock up many people who should just simply not be there. And so while I totally understand, and I guess this is the restorative justice bit, I think it allows you to hold challenging and potentially conflicting ideas together. That for me, we have to look at how we help people to deal with those things that took them to prison, and to deal with the prison, and to deal with the impact of their offending, and the vital importance, therefore, of people being able to have opportunities to look at how they take responsibility, but also to look at what they need and to reflect, so that actually they become the drivers of that process of change. And that's really, really critical. So I can't divorce, for me, the stories that I know people will share that they have been through, where sometimes they have been literal victims, but they've been victims of a set of circumstances, potentially at a period in their lives where that has had an enduring impact. And it isn't an excuse for the offending; it's a reality. And I think we have to not deny that reality. We have to address it. And then I think the other reason I would give is just the sort of common sense societal reason that what we know is that if we do nothing, people go back into prison. And when people go back into prison, that costs us enormous amounts of money. And it seems to me to be just ridiculous that we think that that's the best way of spending really desperately short public funds. And even more so now than when I started in working in this environment and thinking about those figures. I always remember when I ran Sycamore Tree, originally we had a set of resource films that were actually made in America, because that's where the program first started, and they correlated the cost of detaining someone in custody in the States to the cost of studying at Harvard, year to year. And I thought, oh, that's really interesting. Okay, what would I do? How could we anglicize it? And what example could I give here? And at the time, I looked at, I think the cost of holding someone in prison at that point was $38,000, something like that. And I looked at the cost of a year's fees at Eton, and it was exactly that. Was the correlation. And so for people who are driven by the economics, then there's a no-brainer in terms of an economic argument as to why we should do this work. And then there's a wider societal argument, because we know that crime damages families and communities. We see, the impacts of people's continued involvement in criminality impacting through families, through local areas, through communities. So I understand where the detractors for rehabilitative support in prison come from, I don't agree with them.
So it's a really very full answer, and I could be even more brutal about it, because the point for me is we don't execute people anymore. So we don't kill people. We don't say, well, you're bad, so we're taking your life away, so you'll never be a problem again. And if I go back to the restorative justice link, victims often ask 3 questions. Why me? Why now? And how do we stop this happening to anyone else again? And for me, that third question is why part of the reason. So one part of the reason is we need to work with, because it's the offending behaviour that we need to change. And you can't just change behaviour on the outside. There's deep work to have someone look at the impact and look at their life, all the things that you've already said that I won't repeat. And then once we're doing that, there's also a common humanity, because actually, there's a reality here. The people in prison, and I think, is it something like 20% are probably innocent? I think there's something like that.
Yeah,
20%.
I'm not sure what the stats
There's a figure
are
around.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who are innocent, because don't forget, there's a lot of people on remand who haven't even yet had a trial. But there's just a common humanity for me, because the people in prison are just the ones that got caught. That we haven't found all the bad people and shoved them over there, have we? We're living amongst who knows what. I mean, some of it's in the papers and still justice has never been served, So for me, it's like a basic human issue.
No, I totally
How
agree.
can I be all right if you're not all right?
Yeah.
Because the idea of division and separation is a myth.
Yeah.
I'm on this planet and you're on this planet. You're walking around and I'm walking around.
Yeah.
So I can put you over there, but you still exist.
Yeah. You mentioned what victims typically will ask, and there's another question that I think through running Sycamore Tree we learned that they often ask what was going on for you, what was happening in your life that caused you to do
when
this.
you get beyond the first bit, definitely.
And that's really interesting, because that shows a willingness when they're into a restorative process to actually understand where someone's coming from.
Yeah, because
what their experiences
that's a very basic part of human connection. It's a very basic need of understanding and care and trying to find the answers to piece things together, because as I think there's every culture in the world has traditions in storytelling, and we like our stories to have a beginning, middle and an end. And so when you bring people together, they can put that story, they can match up pieces of the jigsaw together and look at the map.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And storytelling is so powerful, I think, and it's definitely something that that Sycamore Tree enabled, that the restorative processes all enable a form of storytelling. And I think while that's not, it's not built as a concrete element into how we work on stand up, one of the kind of pivot moments, and there are little pivot moments through the program that just kind of just change the, shift the ground for people a little bit. And at the end of the first week, we get people to do a legacy presentation. We say it can be really short. I mean, literally 2 minutes max. But, tell us who you are and tell us how you'd like to be remembered. And, sometimes kind of people say, well, what do you mean? So you might say, well, what would you like your grandchildren to say about you? Or what would you like, your community to say about you? And it's really interesting because it's about creating a space where people can think about what they want that story to be.
Yes.
It's the story that isn't yet written. Yes. Because actually what they won't say is, oh, I really want my grandchildren to remember that I was in prison.
Yes, absolutely.
So it's the story that will unfold from there.
And we're sort of coming to the end of our time together, and this has been absolutely fascinating, and I'm sure we're going to have loads of I've got loads of ideas that have sprung up from the things I've heard you say. And this series is called Justice Redesigned. And it was, I'm intended it to talk to people who are actually doing stuff on the ground rather than the politicians and the policymakers. So I have a question for you, if that's okay. And it's really about the first answer that you come up with. And that is, if I were to give you the keys to the Ministry of Justice today, and you could make one change immediately, what change would you make?
It's so difficult to make it only one, isn't it?
I know.
Do you know,
you can cheat and make two.
Well, I'm going to cheat slightly. I'm sure this slightly is a cheat. So I have a dream project, and my dream project would be to have a prison and a governor, and it would obviously have to come with ministerial support at the MOJ, where a group of independent third sector organisations could come together to do all of the kind of education, rehabilitation support. You'd obviously need the structure of prison initially. So you would need officers, you'd need healthcare providers. But if we could take over education, if we could take over all of the things that get labelled things like information, advice and guide, some of the stuff that gets rolled out under contract, I think that would be really exciting. So to kind of re-envision that whole prison experience and to write it afresh. And
well, you're sort of you're touching places in me, because I really dream of while there are MOJ prisons and private prisons, I've always had this idea of we need private prisons that are not for profit, and so this coming together of are independent, and also for me doing things at a very local level, because often prisoners are released into the local kind of area, so that you would be able to really top and tail it for the whole duration, rather than a very fragmented kind of national program.
Exactly. And I think listening, I suppose if there was one fundamental point I would say that is the thread that has run through how we've approached Building Stand Out, has been that we've always wanted to listen to and ground what we do in the needs of the people that we're, our mission is to support and serve. And that's the key, I think.
Yeah, well, and coming at that from a slightly different angle, I have always said and proven that the people who society deem are the problem or are causing the problem, they know the answers. They know the answers.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So on that note, thank you, Penny. This has been really enriching, and I've got to just get hold of you outside of here, and we've got to chat more. Thank you.
Thank you very much.